Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining my presentation on Paulo Freire's essay, The Adult Literacy Process as Cultural Action for Freedom. To understand Freire, one needs to understand his perspective and the world he came from. Paulo Freire was a Brazilian educator who is most famous for his research in critical pedagogy, which he expands upon in his most famous work, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Freire believed that teaching and learning is inherently affected by the often unjust practices of politics and society. Therefore, Freire sought to emancipate those in society he saw as oppressed by encouraging them to participate in the learning process and effect change in their world through self-actualization and social and political action. In The Adult Literacy Process as Cultural Action for Freedom, Freire writes from his third world perspective about the adult literacy process. But his work also has implications for the educational system in general. Growing up in Brazil during an economic crisis, Freire faced hunger and poverty as a young child. These experiences deeply influenced his work and views on education and literacy, as he began to see both through a social justice lens. As Freire explains it, one of the problems with education, literacy programs in particular, was that educators often failed to engage the learner as an active participant in the learning process. Paulo Freire says we all acquire social myths that have an impact on our dominant tendencies, and so learning is a critical process which depends upon uncovering real problems and actual need. He lays out his theory of radical social change by criticizing adult literacy in this essay. In the essay, he calls upon educators to create curriculum in an awareness that sometimes their own philosophies are affecting what and how they teach, and that this often leads to a curriculum that tries to force a type of literacy that may not even be appropriate or understood by the learner. Although Freire is talking about adult literacy in his essay, his general ideas can be applied to the educational system as a whole. In the first part of the reading, Freire talks about how the general philosophies of man affect adult literacy. In other words, when educators create curriculum, their perception of the world and their philosophy towards that curriculum will influence the course content and the methods they use to teach it. Freire argues against the all too common philosophy that illiteracy is the cause of adults being marginalized or pushed to the outside boundaries of society. He points out that there are several problems with this way of thinking. First, this idea assumes that the learner is either illiterate by choice or because they simply haven't been given the opportunity to learn to read. Freire proposes that illiterate adults are not outside of the societal structure because they are illiterate, but they are illiterate because the social structure itself has oppressed them. One of my big takeaways from Freire's work is that education needs to address the larger system of oppression that leads some students to be marginalized or left out of the educational process. Freire calls upon educators to question their preconceived ideas of what and who we are teaching. He says teachers should check their own bias and preconceptions of what they are teaching. As educators, we sometimes judge our students by where they live, their their social economic condition, or even the language that they speak at home. Our impulse, as Freire says, is to educate it and correct its way of thinking according to society's own criteria. One of Freire's key principles is that education does not transform the world. Education changes people, and people transform the world. Freire believes that the traditional curriculum often found in schools leads teachers and students to conform with the ideas of society and politics. He wants educators to approach teaching in a way that actively engages the student to participate in the educational process. His views on literacy can be applied to his belief in a pedagogy that allows everyone to acquire the knowledge they need to look critically at their own culture and society and move toward positive actions to improve their world. I think Freire's work addresses at least 3 of our essential questions, if not all of them. How can curriculum be designed? What is the relationship between the student and the curriculum? What is the relationship between the teacher and the curriculum? Freire thought curriculum and teaching should be more democratic. I think Freire would say curriculum design should be a continuous process and one in which the teacher must learn about and from the student so that knowledge can be constructed in ways that are meaningful to the student. I also think Freire might not agree with the standardized testing that has become such a big part of our educational system today. Thank you for watching my presentation on Paulo Freire.